trigger happy and I give less than a fuck. Love me or hate me, I'ma show enough, rip shit up. It's Mr. Nothing, nice on a mic stand. Mic in the left and the zest in my right hand. I took a puff, had enough now, hold up. If that was Indo, niggas getting rolled up.
What is up, YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review Nate Dogg's second album, Music in Me. Now, this dropped in 2001, right as the 2000s was starting to kick off, and really, Nate Dogg kind of was getting past this, like, the G-Funk era. Really, he dropped a pretty solid double album back in 98, which was, I think it was on Death Row, I'm not sure, but it was one of the last Death Row and West Coast kind of gangster rap 90s albums. And it was actually pretty solid. There's a number of bangers on there. Nate Dogg teamed up with basically every West Coast giant from back in those days. Nate Dogg teamed up with every large West Coast gangster rapper from back in those days. Tupac, Snoop Dogg, Warren G, Big Psych, Corrupt, Daz. All those folks were kind of a facility in that sort of atmosphere. But this is an album a little bit shorter. It's more 2000s-esque, and it kind of tries some new things as far as like getting past like the G-Funk type style and kind of seeing what Nate Dogg was going to do for basically the rest of the 2000s. It's kind of unfortunate that this album, like I really didn't like this album, just to be upfront and blunt about it. I kind of felt like it was the hodgepodge of material on this project was pretty bad, and it seems like Nate Dogg is a better guest feature than when he has the guests on his home project. He's more of the better feature than them doing the features for him. Like Dr. Dre at least delivers, but most of the other stuff on here is pretty paltry in a lot of ways, and there's just a lot of stuff. Considering that Nate Dogg throughout the 90s and the 2000s was a champion of hooks and R&B and rap hooks throughout so many processes, is kind of disappointing. There's no Eminem on here, which is kind of another disappointment, but there's just a number of folks that it just feels like it's pretty weak and just overall kind of a bummer that this project just does not have much of any real bounce to the ounce towards it, and that's just kind of the prospect. But we will kind of talk about the single. Like I said, this is past G-Funk. It is somewhat West Coast, but it doesn't quite have the same atmosphere that the G-Funk Classics Volume 1 and Volume 2 had. It's a little bit more 2000s oriented. Definitely has like that early 2001 type feel. I could tell by listening to Ludacris and Dr. Dre and some of those type bops on here, but the production is pretty terrible. I mean, I just feel like I want to listen to Nate Dogg's 2003 album, because I feel like that's probably a little bit more emphasized, but definitely the stuff on here, minus like I Got Love, the single, and the Dr. Dre beat Your Wife, there's just really not much of anything that's really noteworthy at all. Like, I mean, some of these producers I've seen produce for Exhibit and people like that, Snoop Dogg and some of them, like Battle Cat, Bink, and maybe Melman, and Fred Wreck is another one that I think is produced for Exhibit and some of them. It just feels like a kind of backwash version of like Exhibit's Restless, where Exhibit's Restless kind of had some up and coming West Coast producers that were trying to be like a B- or C+ version of like Dr. Dre's Chronic 2001. I don't want to say a poor man's version of Dr. Dre's 2001, but definitely like maybe a middle class version of that. But Nate Dogg's is like a D-list. I really feel like these beats are just pretty bargain bin and back of the shelf kind of hand-me-down kind of beats that just don't really have anything expressionable about them. But we'll go ahead and talk about the single. So the lead single and the only single from this project is I Got Love, and this is a pretty good song. Like, I do like the kind of, it has a real kind of cultivated and kind of more mature sounding production. Doesn't really sound like in the club. To me, this sounds more like a bar song. This really sounds like a song when you're getting like 4 or 5 shots at the bar and something like that. Or maybe it also reminds me of like having a little bit more cojones. Like you want to walk up to 3 women and talk to all 3 of them type thing. It just is a little bit more ballsy a song, a little bit more mature and not quite as just dance and trying to holla type stuff, but actually suaveness that indicates that there's going to be some success rate and that type stuff. I just kind of feel like I appreciate the concept of it having kind of more of like a more successful kind of vibe towards it, or it's just kind of not so much, like I said, not so much in the dance club, just, happy to be there and kind of gung ho and all that, but just kind of more suave and chilled, that type stuff about it. But I do appreciate it. Really, I think it's a pretty nice song. There's not too many R&B songs that are really like this. Like Akon was a little bit more like, when I look at people who are similar to Nate Dogg, like Akon, T Pain, Trey Songz, Usher, Neo, some of them, I feel like Nate Dogg just had kind of like this kind of callous and cool, just kind of more calculating kind of vibe about him, just with the R&B that he gives off, towards just kind of like a more steely kind of cool type vibe towards it, that just has a different kind of atmosphere about it. And it's just interesting to kind of get that. So it's kind of, but I mean, this is 2000 stuff, so it's just interesting. I think you can hear this in a club, but it's not really a dance number. It just doesn't feel like a dance type song, and to me, it feels more like a bar song where you'd be at the bar flirting with the bartender, getting some drinks, just smacking, that type of stuff. This is kind of what it is. But for the most part, the rest of this album is pretty, like I said, pretty paltry. Just nothing really compares. And I'll go ahead and list the other songs out of 14 that are the only ones elsewise I recommend. So the 3 songs I recommend out of 14, or 13 if you count the I Pledge Allegiance intro. If you subtract the I Pledge Allegiance intro, is I Got Love, Your Woman Has Just Been Cited, and Your Wife with Dr. Dre. So that's Your Woman Has Just Been Cited with Jermaine Dupri, Your Wife with Dr. Dre, and then I Got Love. So Your Wife is probably the best beat on here, and that should be a given because it's a Dr. Dre beat, and particularly an early 2000s Dr. Dre beat, back when he was probably giving out leftovers from the Chronic 2001 and that type stuff. So it just has pretty instant kind of, I mean, it reminds me of like some of the stuff like you would have heard from the Wash soundtrack. This feels like a leftover of like Dr. Dre's The Wash soundtrack. Like there were some beats on there I don't remember. It's been a couple years. But I would have to say that the Wash had some similar type club type bops to this. Like I want to say that there was one with Genuine or something, but it just sounds like something that you'd hear out of TLC, or you'd hear out of uh like Destiny's Child, just an R&B flavored club type bop that kind of has like the dramatic undertones and that type stuff. But Dr. Dre does a great job, so does Nate Dogg. They both make it a pretty catchy and like lethal kind of song. And then the Your Woman Has Just Been Cited with Jermaine Dupri is another one that kind of has, Your Woman Has Just Been Cited with Jermaine Dupri kind of has like a light club sense towards it also. This one's a little bit more dance ready, a little bit more kind of, kind of slow groove, kind of mid-tempo bop towards it. I do kind of feel like, even though the dance is not the particular vibe about it, I just kind of feel like it's a nice kind of night type setting, and there's just not enough songs like this. I feel like these 2 songs, Your Woman Has Just Been Cited and Your Wife with Dr. Dre, both of which kind of have like those particular vibes of just kind of getting a little bit more of like a night venue, kind of drink in hand, cell phone in hand, pager in hand type stuff, where you just kind of mac a little bit, kind of enjoy the night, and maybe have like a couple quick dances, dance for 1 or 2 or 3 songs, and then you're out. And then you dip out and that type stuff. And it's just kind of, there need to be way more moments like that. I just feel like Real Pimp had a pretty terrible beat. Like it's a disappointment that that was the song with Ludacris on there. I just could not get into it. This was too much. Just had way too much emphasis, and it just had a kind of arrangement and like the pattern of it that didn't really do much. And then Diddy Dum Diddy Do with Snoop Dogg and the East Siders, that was like a real D-list beat that probably could have sent, like, I think that like Fred Reck, who produced for Exhibit, just sounded better. He gave Exhibit better beats than Nate Dogg, and that's pretty awkward considering that Nate Dogg has been around longer. And like Backdoor just felt like a cut that you'd hear in a movie. And like, yeah, like the Corrupt song, just that was another D-list beat that wasted a Corrupt feature. I felt like they probably would have had good chemistry otherwise. If Dr. Dre would have given Nate Dogg like a few more beats. I just don't know why Dr. Dre, as good a chemistry they had, showed up so sparingly. He gave him 1 beat, 1 guest verse, and then called it a day. And it's like, come on, this is Nate Dogg. This is the dude that's been with you since the Chronic. Dr. Dre should have given Nate at least 2 or 3 beats on here. And definitely the Corrupt song should have had a Dr. Dre beat. And like maybe even like a second single. Eminem should have been on here. Snoop Dogg and the East Siders should have had a better beat. The Exhibit song should have had a better beat. Lil Mo and Exhibit, that one was another kind of punky, kind of low key, and just overall cruddy kind of club beat that just had too much bravado in it and just it was overemphasized more than it needed to be. There's just a lot of stuff that kind of was on here, like the Ludacris, Corrupt, Exhibit songs all fall through, plus Snoop Dogg. And there's just really not enough in like the spare songs like Concrete Streets, Music and Me. Music and Me was kind of trying to be like this kind of more introspective R&B number, but I couldn't quite get into it. And I mean, I just felt like Nate Dogg just exuberantly sailed through the hoops and passed the tests that he normally showed in quality on like G Funk Classics. It's just so much better, so much more emphasized. Nate Dogg sounds so much more comfortable. It's not to say that Nate Dogg is not good on 2000s beats, because he is, but it's just when it comes to like his own stuff, it kind of felt kind of patchy, and it also kind of felt like he was kind of lost and didn't understand as far as like the sort of stuff to do. I mean, it worked on I Got Love. That was a beautiful emphasized song that sounded really cultivated, but I just could not figure out why there were not any other beats or any other type songs, especially topic wise or otherwise, that just had the same expression. Two good club songs with Your Woman Has Just Been Cited and Your Wife, but that's about the only best other moments that showcase an R&B album that could go on to have personality. And that just relatively happens to be a thing. Like, he does step out to the club more. You will find more club songs than just the ones I listed, but it's very, like, the production on here is so bad, and the rest of the song emphasis, it's not catchy singing. The choruses don't do much, and it's just not the classic Nate Dogg that you would have heard on like Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, Dr. Dre's The Chronic, Tupac's All Eyes on Me, or just anything from the 90s from Nate Dogg. It just really was a disappointing layout that Nate just did not come through with the hooks, the beats, and the song topics, and just the overall electricity that he needed to. And that's just kind of the thing. But so I'm going to give this album, me liking 3 songs out of 13, I'm going to give this album just a 2 out of 10. It's pretty bad. I mean, I would almost give it a 1.75, but because I like 3 songs out of 13, that's almost a fourth, but it's just going to get a 2 out of 10. It's just like, come on, Nate, you can do so much better than this. The beats were just completely lackluster, and everything about this project, minus like the 3 club bops and bar bops, or just a complete ham and just a awful waste of time. That just kind of happens to be a thing. But the social score, I will go ahead and give like a 3.5 out of 10, just because it does at least step out, and it attempts to step out. And depending upon your ear for quality, you might notice that there are some stepping out moments, but it's just not very catchy. That's the whole thing. It's just not nearly as catchy as Nate Dogg on a feature, and it's just kind of a colossal disappointment. But there might be some stuff you might take a liking to. And in terms of the future, well, there's not really any more future because Nate Dogg is unfortunately deceased. So there's not really much that can happen. But I mean, Nate does at least have a 2003 album and then the double albums. There's more stuff I'm going to review by Nate Dogg, but that's just kind of the concept as far as trying to say that. But yeah, it's just kind of the thing. I was kind of hoping for more here, but for what it is, this is still worth picking up just for the small amount of gems that there is.